Two cities, two tenants, two property managers. Neither one knew the other existed. Both stopped paying rent during the end of the COVID eviction moratorium. Both intentionally disconnected the drain from their water heaters and let the water slowly destroy the floors while continuing to live there. When everything was over, it cost me more than $40,000 between the repairs, lost rents, vacancies, and costs. Crazy part wasn't the damage. The crazy part was that the first time it happened, I thought I was looking at a simple $1,000 repair. Absolutely had no idea what was waiting underneath the floor. People think the biggest risk of owning rental property is a tenant who stops paying rent. It is so. A tenant who stops paying eventually leaves. A tenant who intentionally damages your property while they're still living there, erases months of income before you even know there's a problem. This happened during the strangest periods I experienced as a landlord. It was 2022 rolling into 2023. The country is finally coming out of the COVID eviction rules. Both tenants had received rental assistance for months. Once the assistance ended, they simply stopped paying. They used the remaining eviction protections to stay in the properties as long as they legally could while the eviction process slowly worked its way forward. Every extra day they remained in those units increased my exposure. And that's something new investors rarely think about. Everyone builds spreadsheets showing cash flow. Almost nobody builds one showing what happens when a property produces nothing but expenses for 9 straight months. And I was about to find out exactly what that looked like. The first indication that anything was wrong came from my property manager. She noticed the kitchen floor was wet. From everything we knew at the time, it looked like damaged linoleum. Honestly, I wasn't concerned. I've owned enough rental properties that flooring repairs don't move the needle emotionally anymore. In my mind, I figured maybe $1,000. Replace the flooring, dry everything out, get the property back online. Simple. That assumption lasted until the contractor started pulling the floor apart. The linoleum came up first, then the plywood. Then instead of finding a small leak, we found a saturated subfloor. Moisture had been sitting there long enough that it had soaked completely through the plywood and into the floor joists underneath. The joists, that changed everything. This wasn't cosmetic damage. This was structural damage. Now the job involved demolition, drying equipment, moisture testing, replacing damaged materials, waiting until everything reached an acceptable moisture level before rebuilding. Water damage doesn't care about your schedule. Rush it, and you'll be doing the same repair twice. As I looked over the scope of work, I wasn't thinking about the repair itself. I was thinking about recovery. How long before the property starts producing income again? How many months before the repair costs are paid back? How long before the credit lines used to fund the repair return to zero? That's where my brain goes. No emotion, just math. At the time, I thought that was going to be the entire story. Oh, I was wrong. About a month later, another phone call changed everything. This time, it wasn't the same property. It wasn't even the same city. Different property, different property manager, different tenant. Same damage. That's what caught my attention. Not another repair. Repairs are part of the business. I've become pretty numb to those over the years. What surprised me was seeing two completely unrelated tenants living in two different cities, creating almost identical damage. Both intentionally disconnected the drain from the water heater. Both continued living in the property while the water was spreading underneath the flooring. Neither reported the problem. Neither requested maintenance. Neither did anything to stop it. The damage wasn't accidental. It had been obvious that the leak had been allowed to continue for an extended period of time. At that point, I figured the worst was behind me. It wasn't. Both tenants disappeared. Different cities, different properties, same outcome. They left in the middle of the night, no explanation, no accountability, no attempt to make things right. Just gone. Now, the work really began. The number I was about to see wasn't going to be anywhere close to what I thought the original budget was. The number I was about to see wasn't going to be anywhere close to what I originally budgeted. The flooring had to come out. The saturated plywood replaced. The damaged structural components had to be dried, tested correctly before the units could ever be rented again. Every repair pushed back the day those properties could be producing income. The repair bills alone reached roughly $20,000. And that was the beginning. 6 months of unpaid rent, 3 additional months before the repairs were complete, and both units were ready. 3 additional months before the repairs were complete, and both units ready for new tenants. Another $2,000 in court costs. By the time I added everything up, the total financial impact had climbed past $40,000. People hear that number and assume I was furious. Honestly, I wasn't. I owned enough rentals that I don't get emotional over repairs anymore. I get analytical. My first thought wasn't how unfair it was. My first thought was how many months? How many months would it take to rebuild the reserves and pay back the credit line used to fix everything? That's the difference between owning rental property and operating a business. One thing I was never willing to do was simply write those losses off. I proceeded the unpaid rent through the eviction process. The property damage went through small claims court. Those judgments now follow both tenants. Whether every dollar is eventually collected isn't really the point. There were consequences for intentionally damaging someone's property. At the same time, I wasn't interested in spending energy blaming tenants. Whenever something goes wrong in one of my businesses, I ask myself the question, what system failed? Businesses improve by improving systems. So we changed ours. If rent starts coming in late, legitimate inspections are scheduled. Pest inspections, HVAC filter replacements, contractor walkthroughs preparing for turnover. If utilities are just disconnected before a lease expires, someone gets inside the property. Every property receives quarterly habitation walkthroughs, looking for excessive trash, bed bugs, deferred maintenance, or signs something isn't right. I don't personally manage tenants. That's why I hire property managers. What I manage are the systems, because systems protect assets. Stories like this are why I now tell new investors to stop thinking about rental properties as passive income. It is a business. Every business goes through stabilization periods. Sometimes it's turnover. Sometimes it's a natural disaster. Sometimes it's a market correction. Sometimes it's a market correction. Sometimes it's an event like COVID. And sometimes it's simply a tenant who decides they don't care about your property anymore. Your business can't survive in those types of periods. Eventually, the business won't survive. At the time, I owned 8 properties and 27 rentals. Did losing more than $40,000 hurt? Abso-freaking-lutely. But did it threaten the business? It didn't threaten the business because I understood something that every long-term investor eventually learns. The goal isn't avoiding problems. That's impossible. The goal is building enough reserves, enough systems, enough discipline to survive them. Repairs eventually get completed. Units eventually get rented again. The reserves eventually get rebuilt. The business moves forward. If you're thinking about buying rental properties, don't just prepare for closing day. Prepare for setbacks that nobody puts in a spreadsheet. Because if you stay in the business long enough, you'll eventually have your own coffee story. This one just happened to cost me $40,000.